started right after college, primarily in an SEO role. And so I think my take on content, although my background was in content and what I'd studied was journalism and communication, my perspective on content was exactly kind of how you described it, right? Like, how can we make Google happy? How can we get it in front of the most eyes without necessarily thinking about intent or the value that it's actually providing to readers or consumers of that content. And I think that was just the nature of the game at that point. And even then, I think the companies that really nailed intent and really nailed writing for that intent and writing to provide value, they definitely won. I think the difference is that now that's kind of a requirement, right? So you have the content, if you want it to make everybody happy, you want it to make the readers happy, you want it to make Google happy, it has to provide value. Whereas in the very beginning, when I started, you could write bad content, you could write content that didn't serve a purpose, and it would do fairly well in terms of traffic. I don't think that's necessarily the case anymore. I think that's a key differentiator for most organizations now. If you have somebody in charge of content or a content department or somebody thinking about content from the perspective of the reader and from the perspective of the buyer persona, it's almost like that's the bare minimum at this point. Whereas maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was like just what the winning organizations were doing. So I think just the nature of Google has forced that function a little bit. And because there's just so many more companies that understand the value of content marketing, it just has to be better, or else companies can't really succeed like that. In terms of thinking about it as a function, it's a little complicated in the way that I've seen it has been shifting even, I mean, over the course of the last 15 years, it's shifted in the sense of where does content sit? Who does content report to? Who's in charge of content? I've seen it kind of all kinds of different ways. I've seen content sit in digital. I've seen content sit on demand. I've seen it sit on brand teams. I've seen it stand out on its own in its own little island. And I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer there. I think it's going to look different depending on what stage of growth a company is in. I think the key there is less about where it sits and more about making it accessible and aligned with the rest of the organization. And what I mean by that is content isn't a function anymore. It's more a partnership with other pieces of organization. So whether within the marketing department or outside of the marketing department, there's so many people that should have an influence on content and content strategy. And I think that's really the key in a modern marketing team to success in content. So can digital and SEO voice their opinions and come with insights and look at reports and come up with different topics based on what they're finding? Can customer-facing roles and prospect-facing roles voice their opinions and come to the table with potentially new ideas that those who aren't in customer-facing roles haven't thought of necessarily? So it's more about who has access to the content and content strategy, and also are you giving your content creators space to speak to all of the different people who might have good ideas and who might have insights, versus I think the old way of doing it, which was essentially just setting up a content factory and churning out as much as possible.
I love it. So much you said there was good. And I want to let me see if I can say this. Spiff specific. That's tough to say. But like, what have you found with content and org placement at Spiff? Like, how are you organized? Why are you organized that way? Like, what have you found has worked? Maybe what hasn't worked? Like, get into your own use case.
Yeah, so I've only been at Spiff for less than 2 years. I think in the grand scheme of things, that's probably like decades in Spiff terms, because we're not a very old company. But we have tried a couple of different structures, and none of them I wouldn't say any of them were particularly bad or good. Right now, content sits on the digital team. And that is a product of, and that's my team, and that's a product of, I think, how we built out the marketing organization, in the sense that I think I was one of a couple of the first hires here after the CMO. And so because I'd had history running content departments before and content functions before in an organization, it just was a little bit of a natural fit. And from there, it's grown. And we work with, I would say, probably 4 or 5 different people now on the content side, and they roll up into me, but it's more of, the way that I think of it is more of a network. And I know that that doesn't necessarily work for like hierarchy purposes in an organization, but basically, I know that people on my content team and anyone who is writing content for Spiff is in regular communication with a couple of different people. And the first is the core persona that we're selling to in other organizations, and that is on that admin and finance side. So are they having regular conversations with the person in-house that has the most knowledge of being the person we're selling to? Are they regularly meeting with them, asking them questions? Do they have a relationship there? I think it's important to, especially in B2B companies where you have access to that, it's important to set up those conversations and help content creators have relationships with the key personas that you're selling to, if they're available within the organization. That's been huge. I think it's also important for them to have access to all of the different seats at the marketing table. So do they talk to product marketing? Do they talk to customer marketing? Are they working closely with demand gen to make sure that the content we are creating aligns well with integrated campaign strategies? And then on the branding side, of course, it's about voice and making sure that you're embodying the voice of kind of what we want the company to sound like. So it's the way that I picture it in my head is more of like content marketing sitting at the center of this network where they're available and open to, and it's kind of baked into the, I don't know if you would call it the operations, but operationally baked into the role that they're having conversations with all of the people who can bring different types of insights to the table. And that's not to say they're coming up with ideas or simply just like the content person is never just an order taker. I mean it more in the sense of, are they having conversations that can lead the content people and the people responsible for creating content and content strategy to the ideas that are going to be the most successful, if that makes sense.